Hello YouTubers, my name is Zuma. I'm your bee expert, all the way from South Africa Springs, just next to Johannesburg. I really appreciate the opportunity given by Wade Maya. Shout out to him for all the assistance. And today I thought I'll share with you as to how do you select an area where you're gonna put an apiary. It is very important that you know exactly where you're gonna put your bees. You have to understand there are basic requirements. Basically, there's a number of requirements in order for you to actually farm with bees. One of the most critical components before you even start with site selection is to establish the legal requirements for you to actually start with bee farming. So each and every state, each and every country has legislation that governs on how one can farm with bees. So in your localities, you need to establish what are the legal requirements for you to be able to establish an apiary. So, one, there are national, provincial, and local authorities, depending on your jurisdiction. So it is important to establish the requirement, especially on your local authority. You need to ensure that you verify as to what are the requirements. Like for instance, there may be requirements in terms of the number of hives you can have in your locality. There may be a requirement in terms of, especially in the urban setting, you will perhaps need a permit to actually establish such an apiary in an urban setting. Normally in South Africa, once you farm with bees in a rural setting, the requirements are not as stringent, as tough as if you want to do bees in a city, for instance. So it's important to cover that aspect of the legal obligation you have. As vegetation in your area plays a huge role and is a critical success factor for you to farm with bees. If your area has limited number of resources in terms of vegetation, your bee farming experience, your bee farming career, or your bee farming in general will definitely not succeed, because you need vegetation around you. Yes, there are plants that are seasonal that you can plant to sustain that if you don't have any vegetation around all year round, for instance. So vegetation, the types of plants in your area determine your success in terms of bee farming. So it is very important for you to establish what kind of vegetation, what kinds of plants are available in the area that the bees need to collect that nectar, collect the pollen that they need to actually make food and make honey for you. So it is very important, a critical success factor. I will stress it to say you need to analyze all your vegetation in your area to ensure that your bees are well taken care of in terms of making food, producing abundance of honey in your locality. Ideally, the site should be one should be able to access the site using a vehicle, because most of the equipment, especially when you're harvesting, are heavy, and you can break your back and injure yourself by walking long distance, lifting a 15 kg, 20 kg weight of the honey or of the brood that you either move to other places. So having access to a road infrastructure or having access for a vehicle to come and park next to your apiary will be a great deal. It will assist you a great deal. and you'll be able to farm effectively and cover all the economics about your body and so on. So I will advise that when you choose a site, make sure that it is accessible by your vehicle. And then the other point that I would like to make, it is important to make sure that your apiary has sufficient shade. Shade helps the bees to cool down, especially during the midday sun. When it's hot, the bees will always try and mitigate the heat by going out of the hive to cool the hive inside. So when it's midday and it's too hot, they go out to make sure that the hive is cool and then go back. But when there is trees, shade provided, they are able to mitigate that heat, and they are less to either go out and cool down in that fashion. So those are some of the important things, especially when I select the site. The other important facts, other important requirements that you need to take care is that when we farm, we always strive to farm organically. But as you are aware, we've got neighbors around, and they may not be practicing organic farming. So it is very important that we make sure that we know what our neighbors put on their crops, because the crops, the pesticide that they spray on their crops may affect your production in honey. So if you know, for instance, that your area is pesticide free, then you are at ease and you won't have any issues that has to do with pesticides. Pesticides can be very dangerous for your bees, as they may die. A number of hives in other countries we've seen, when they spray, when the farmers in the neighboring farms spray their crops, they actually affect the local bee population and kill the bees. So it's important to know, especially your neighbors, to know what type of fertilizers are they using, are they good for the bees, and so on. I must say, if you cover that aspect, you will never have any issues with producing your organic honey, for instance. You can claim easily to say this is definitely organic. But once again, the risk of having farms close by using pesticide is that you may actually lose all your colonies, and it will be a disaster. Can you imagine if you've got 50 hives and the pesticides are sprayed, the bees goes to these fields because they grow indiscriminately, they go everywhere. You'll then lose, basically. So it's always, it helps to know your surroundings in terms of what chemicals your neighboring farms are using. If you are aware and engaging with your neighbor, and you know that on a certain day they will be spraying, and you know the type of spraying that they have, you can close off, you can seal off your hive for the next 24 to 48 hours to protect your bees from exposure to those pesticides. So it is important that you actually engage with your neighboring farms, especially when they're about to spray. You must know what pesticides are they, how are they going to affect your bees, and by taking that action, you'll be protecting your hive, making sure that your bees sustain your future production. So once again, let's recap. It's important to make sure that when your neighbor is spraying pesticide, you must know that he is going to be spraying on a certain day, and you will be spraying this type of a pesticide, and you know the risk involved. So what is the mitigating action? All that you have to do is to close off your hive. Make sure that the bees are sealed and closed in. They can survive for that time. 24 to 48 hours for bees to be indoors, it's not a problem. They can survive. But you have protected them from exposure to pesticide. Also important, it is important to actually locate your hive facing south. That is to ensure that the morning sun, as it strikes the hive, it warms the hive, and the bees are able to go out and forage earlier than if they were not in a south-facing where they can actually get the sun rays that warms the hive. So it is important that when you place your hives, they are actually facing the sun. The other very important factor is to ensure that water is in abundance in the areas around the apiary. If there is no water, for instance, it is important to provide a water source for your bees, and that can be done by supplementing and making ponds which the bees can use to get water from. Water is critical in the production of honey. It's always great when you've got a situation where your apiary is not seen by the public. When people see your apiary, you've got higher chances of vandalism, you've got higher chances of people pilfering and stealing the honey. So when it's hidden away from sight, you actually protect the people from being stung by the bees, and you actually protect your hives. So it's always best for the public not to have view of your apiary. It's always a great part of security for your apiary that people don't see your apiary, actually know the location where your apiary is. As I indicated, if your apiary is visible, the likelihood of people being stung as they pass by, it's also there. But mostly, it helps for people to have limited information about the whereabouts of your apiary. Once again, it is very important to ensure that your apiary has less number of leaves, logs, anything that can combust and cause fire, because if that is the case, when fire comes, your apiary will be burnt. Fortunately for us at Isidleke Bees, we don't have such a problem because our concrete hives, they can withstand fire and actually keep the bees safe inside without them burning. That I'll explain in more details in future episodes of A, B, and C of bee farming with Isidleke Farm. I'll definitely explain the benefit of using such technology, which that has noise pollution, can actually hamper your bee farming experience, can actually hamper the production of honey, because vibration on the earth, so which means if you are farming next to power stations, next to mining or mining areas, your bees will actually suffer, as they do not like noise pollution. So noise pollution must be avoided at all time to ensure that there is maximum production of all your bee products, of all your honey, wax, and so on. So let's try and minimize the placement of apiaries next to those type of setup, especially where there is a lot of noise. Fencing is very important as it protects against animals and people. So it's always good to make sure that your apiary is fenced.